Header flying across the continental United States at 37,000 feet is an Airbus A320. Although everything appears normal from the outside, no one has been able to get in contact with the pilots of this airplane for about 1.5 hours. In order for you to comprehend the narrative surrounding Northwest Airlines Flight 188, you must have a basic understanding of the environment in which the airlines operate. Operated often in the US on September 11th. The 9/11 terrorist attacks and a few more economic variables had combined to make these airlines' survival extremely difficult. As a result, there were many Chapter 11 bankruptcy protections for a few carriers, and many large mergers followed as a result of it. Between the years 2004 and 2008 for these airlines, one of the combinations included Delta Airlines. And October 2008 saw the launch of Northwest Airlines. This new corporation briefly had the title of largest airline in the world following that merger. You can now expect tension to arise from each airline merger. This is a result of the fusion of these two corporate cultures. Additionally, there will be items that need to be combined, such seniority lists. And as a result, some pilots or cabin crew members may feel that their seniority is being diminished, because all of a sudden hundreds of people may be piled on top of them. Additionally, modifications have been made to standard operating procedures, which govern how the aircraft are in fact being flown. This also applied to the merging of Northwest and Delta. They also made adjustments to the appearance of the pre-flight configuration, for instance. Thus, in Northwest before the merger, the captain would be the one who always configured the aircraft's overhead panel and FMC. And the pilot in flight established the FMC following the merging. And the above panel would be set up by the first officer. These are now minor adjustments. However, after many years of being accustomed to flying an airplane in a particular manner, and you're abruptly instructed to fly the identical aircraft in a different manner, the airlines knew that pilots have it tough all the time. And during the merger process, they made these adjustments gradually. Duty friction. Something else that altered for the pilots. Their preferred bidding mechanism was in place at the time of this merger. The manner in which they submitted bids for the trips they intended to take in the upcoming months. Because most airlines operate in such a way that the pilots will be able to influence how their scheduling is done. For instance, based on their level of seniority within the organization, be able to influence things like their base of operations, their actions from the previous month, the duration of their flights, etc. What kind of flights they hope to take in the future. As of the now, my airline lacks a bidding system. And the reason for it is that practically all of us reside in the base from where we work. And each night we return home without fail. This implies that your choice of locations is truly irrelevant. However, that isn't particularly prevalent in America. Rather, many of the pilots are stationed around the United States. They also need to fly into their base so they can start working there. And as a result, it may significantly affect the quality of life. What sort of bids they are able to secure. The Northwest-Delta merger involved a significant modification to the bidding process. Also, 150 pages of instructions on how to use the new bidding system had been sent to the pilots. Was likely to succeed. Additionally, nearly all of them thought it was quite unclear. Difficult to deal with. And this is going to significantly affect the course of this flight. The pilots. Both of the pilots on Northwest Flight 188 had a great deal of experience. The 53-year-old captain lived together despite being stationed in Minneapolis, north of Seattle, with his spouse. This month, on his first day, late in the afternoon, he attempted to bid on flights. Then on his final day, that concluded early around noon so he could go to Minneapolis. Prior to his first trip and return home following his final flight, therefore reducing the quantity of Minneapolis motel nights he was forced to spend. Prior to beginning his 5-day workweek, there were. On his second day, after spending the day at home with his wife, the incident occurred. He reported for duty at 6:30 on his first day as a submissive crew member, traveling from Seattle to Minneapolis in a jump seat. And a few hours before noon he touched down. It was additionally before to the commencement of his first service. He was in the crew room of Northwest Airlines during that period. conversing with a few of the teachers who were there in the crew room on the operation of this new bidding method. The first cop, a 54-year-old Salem, Oregon resident, was likewise well seasoned. Additionally, his roster arrangement was identical to that of the captain. He would so attempt to arrive by plane on his first day. He left at 6:30 on the first day that they were rostered together. He took off and landed about midday, right before he checked in for his trip, in the direction of San Diego. The previous day, the two pilots met for the first time on October 20, 2009, just after noon. It was their first time flying together. Together with the cabin crew, they convened in the crew room and went through their flight records for the Minneapolis to San Diego descent. And it appeared to be an entirely typical flight. They walked outside to the plane, got the occupants inside, and completed a perfectly uneventful flight in the direction of San Diego. The pilots had a scheduled 19-hour stop in San Diego. However, the cabin staff made their way back toward Minneapolis. The shuttle bus from the hotel picked up the pilots. They proceeded to the hotel where the captain's wife was waiting for him. In fact, she had come down from Seattle just to spend the evening with him. This implied that the pilots parted ways and the captain and his spouse left to have supper while the first officer walked out to eat alone. However, they both made it back to the motel long before midnight and slept through the entire night. This indicated that on October 21st, the next day, they were well rested. It is the day the flying mishap occurred. Commencing, the pilots departed the hotel just before noon, drove to the airport, and began preparing for the trip before takeoff. Additionally, everything appeared okay throughout the pre-flight procedures. The one minor problem was that there was a certain of predicted turbulence in the clean air along their flight path. The standard route had so been somewhat altered. However, that was not uncommon in any way. The plan was for them to ascend to a cruising height of 35,000 feet. However, they may ascend further if necessary. There was a slight delay in the arrival flight, and the cabin staff who planned to travel back to Minneapolis with them was already seated on the trip. Upon the aircraft's arrival, one of the pilots boarded. They made their introductions to the cabin crew and conducted a briefing. The main member of the cabin crew regarding the possible turbulence during the return flight. They also examined the aircraft's technical condition, which was okay. The airplane was in perfect condition. The captain will be the pilot flying for the flight, the pilots determined, and the first officer pilot monitoring the 121.5 while reducing the loudness a little bit, only to differentiate between the two radio frequencies. We always have 121.5 selected on our backup radio in case we lose radio communication. We're now speaking with the center, but we can reach them at 121.5 by calling someone else. Thus, it is what we constantly do. Moreover, this Airbus A320 had an ACARS system linked up with the third communication radio. Additionally, the firm and air traffic control may SMS the pilots via the ACARS technology, and that operates by notifying the text message recipient. The pilots will need to access the message on the ECM screen located within the cockpit, as in physically extract the message. It will not appear on the ECM display. There is a mechanism in place that allows pilots to hear an audio notification when they get an ACARS message that came via the cockpit ding. Sadly, though, this aircraft was not outfitted with it. Generally speaking, the Northwest Fleet's Airbus A320s were exclusively outfitted with for this if they plan to fly across huge oceanic areas. Getting at ease. The first officer's flight proceeded flawlessly for almost 2 hours. Maintained communication with the air traffic controller at Denver Center. The flight attendant phoned the cockpit at that moment to see whether they were interested in obtaining a meal. Inside the headquarters, the dispatchers, Northwest Airlines employees are becoming increasingly concerned since they can only view that the airplane should have been beginning at 37,000 feet, but it is sustaining that height to descend in the distant past. Furthermore, they are unsure if there has been any breaching of the flight deck. It's possible that this aircraft is not even within the pilot's control. And it's at this point, almost an hour into the Nordo celebration, when at last, the domestic event network is turned on. The plane merely keeps flying along the same scheduled path, and when it reaches its predetermined destination, it broadcasts a message on the FMC CDU units, essentially expressing that before me by saying lat discont ahead. What are you folks wanting me to do with my lateral discontinuity? Nobody also observes this. Rather, the plane passes over the last waypoint. Consequently, the flying mode annunciator is altered. Both major flying displays switching between heading and navigation modes. Thus, the plane merely keeps flying straight ahead, staying on its previous course. Before to the last waypoint. In what location are we? This is roughly around the time at 20:01 Central Standard Time. That it was okay for them to land. At 37,000 feet, the airplane passes over Minneapolis Airport and proceeds eastward. After around 12 minutes, a flight attendant makes a call. The cockpit and find out when they plan to arrive. There is a hint of concern in the rear, because they are unaware that the plane is beginning to descend. They normally hear the airplane tilting down and the engine spooling back, but they haven't observed anything like that, and they haven't gotten the typical ding that they usually get when the plane falls through 10,000 feet. The pilots eventually glance up from their conversation at this moment and notices that the navigation display is merely a blank screen with no additional data shown. It's a gloomy evening, so they glance outside but are unable to see any lights. By reaching over, the captain switches to the compass rose mode from the standard map mode on his GPS screen. In this manner, he is also able to see somewhat behind the plane, and he realizes that they had flown almost 100 nautical miles, surpassing Minneapolis, east of where they were going. Now, the first radio communication officer attempted to contact air traffic control, but naturally, they adjusted the frequency on their COM-1 more than an hour and a half ago. Thus, that is ineffective. Rather, he approaches the backup radio box, which is tuned to emergency frequency 121.5, and he succeeds in seizing control of Winnipeg. Winnipeg provides them with the Minneapolis center frequency, which is the one they should be using. They notify them over the phone that they have been preoccupied, and that, instead, they intended to do a complete 180-degree spin to approach from the east. It's clear that air traffic control is glad to hear from the pilots again. However, they also exhibit a hint of suspicion. They are unsure if they are chatting to the pilots in reality. They then inquire as to why the pilots had been Nordo for such a long time. The pilot can only say that they were sidetracked,
the cabin crew, and from the air traffic controllers. And what
Then
they came up
the
with
air
was that
traffic
the
controllers
pilots had
cleared them and
indeed
granted many
become
left and
very,
right
very distracted.
For the initial
They had
arrival
lost
route
their
before
situational
choosing a
awareness
second one,
completely
only to ensure
because
that
they
the
were
aircraft
using their personal electronic
genuinely
devices, which
carrying
they
out
were
their
not
directions.
allowed to do, and
As the
chose to
pilots
revoke
descend, air
both
traffic
of the
control
pilots'
also requests
licenses
that they
within
affirm.
days of the event.
The
This
flying
meant
deck is
that the
safely
pilots
closed.
lost their employment with Northwest
Understanding the
Airlines.
message,
The captain
the
decided
first
to
officer also
pre-retire,
glances down at
and
their
the
ECM
first
monitor
officer
during this,
never got back into
and
employment.
discovers
We
they have
have to
many
maintain
ACARS
situational
communications.
awareness at all times.
When he
We have to
brings
know
them
what's
up,
going
he
on,
notices
where we
many
are,
notes
and who we're
instructing
talking
him to
to.
get in touch with
There
air
are
traffic
mitigations
control.
in the airspace because that's
Sadly,
when we
though,
normally
when he
get
enters and wishes
transferred
to
over.
read
If we
them,
haven't heard anything, we need to
instead,
check why
he
that
clicks
is.
the delete all
And
button,
there are
which
many other
eliminates all
techniques
of
like
the
that, like for
ACAS
example using
communication.
headset and making sure
Now
that
that
the
the
volume
pilots and
is
air traffic
loud enough so that you
controllers
can
are
hear it,
communicating
and
via
the use
radio
of
again,
1.1.5
NORAD
on a volume that
The
the
fighter
system
jets they intended
would
to
have
launch
worked
to intercept the
if
plane.
NORAD would have sent up the fighter jets and they would have been intercepted. Well, then